He was the youngest billionaire on the East Coast, about to sign the deal of the century. She was just the waitress pouring his sparkling water. Or so he thought. When she whispered, "You're about to lose everything," he threw his head back and laughed in her face. His lawyers smirked. His fiancée rolled her eyes. But 10 seconds later, the laughter stopped dead. Because that waitress knew a secret buried so deep, it was about to destroy his entire life. Who was she really? And why was the person trying to destroy him sitting right next to him? You won't believe how this ends. The hierarchy at the Obsidian Room, Manhattan's most exclusive steakhouse, was simple. If you were sitting at a table, you were a god. If you were standing, wearing the crisp black waistcoat and white shirt of the service staff, you were furniture. Madeleine Courier preferred being furniture. It was safer that way. At 28, Madeleine had mastered the art of being invisible. She knew how to refill a wine glass without breaking a conversation's flow. She knew how to crumb a table while looking at the floor. She kept her brown hair pulled back in a severe, tight bun, wore zero makeup, and spoke only when spoken to. To the elite of New York, she wasn't Madeleine. She was just Miss, or excuse me. That was exactly how she needed it to be. If anyone looked too closely at Madeleine Courier, if they really studied the sharp intelligence in her grey eyes, or noticed the way she memorized credit card numbers at a glance, they might realize she didn't belong here. They might realize that 3 years ago, Madeleine didn't wear an apron. She wore a tailored suit in the forensic accounting division of a federal agency that didn't officially exist. But that life was ash now, burned to the ground. Table 4 needs a refresh on the sparkling, the floor manager, a nervous man named Arthur, hissed into her ear. And for God's sake, don't look Harrison Blackwell in the eye. He fired the last server for breathing too loud. Madeleine nodded, her face a mask of obedience. Yes, Arthur. She picked up the chilled crystal pitcher and moved toward table 4, the prime booth in the center of the room. It was occupied by 4 people who collectively controlled more wealth than the GDP of a small country. Harrison Blackwell sat at the head. He was devastatingly handsome in that aggressive, shark-like way. Dark hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and a bespoke navy suit that cost more than Madeleine's yearly rent. He was the CEO of Blackwell Sovereign, a tech conglomerate currently eating up competitors across the globe. To his right sat Isabella Vane, his fiancée. She was a vision in red silk, a model-turned philanthropist with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. To his left were 2 men, Robert Sterling, his heavy-set, sweating attorney, and a man Madeleine didn't recognize, a thin, pale European with a scar running through his eyebrow. The energy at the table was electric, manic. They were celebrating. "To the merger," Harrison announced, raising a glass of scotch that cost $600 a shot. "By midnight, Blackwell Sovereign will officially own the Helios grid. We'll control the data flow for half of Europe." "Cheers, darling," Isabella purred, clinking her glass against his. "You've worked so hard for this." "It wasn't hard," Harrison scoffed, his voice carrying the arrogance of a man who had never lost. "It was inevitable. The Greeks were desperate. We just helped them along." Madeleine approached the table silently. She moved to Robert Sterling's side to refill his water. As she poured, her eyes instinctively scanned the table. It was a reflex she couldn't kill, a ghost from her old life. The table was littered with the remnants of a seafood tower, but in the center, pushed aside near the breadbasket, was a thick stack of legal documents. The merger agreement. Harrison was too confident. He had left the signature page open, face up. Madeleine's eyes darted to the text. It was upside down, but she had spent years reading upside-down ledgers across interrogation tables. She passed the legalese instantly. Clause 14b, asset liquidation and transfer of liability. Her heart skipped a beat. That wasn't standard. She poured water for the European man. He was watching Harrison with a predatory calmness. Madeline glanced at the document again. Her eyes narrowed. There, buried in the fine print of the definitions section. The acquiring entity is hereby defined not as Blackwell Sovereign Inc., but as BS Holdings, LLC, Cayman. Madeline almost dropped the picture. Harrison Blackwell wasn't buying the Helios grid. He was signing a document that authorized a shell company in the Cayman Islands to leverage his company's assets to buy the debt. It was a poison pill structure. If he signed that, he wasn't acquiring a company. He was transferring all of Blackwell Sovereign's liquid cash into an untraceable offshore account, leaving his own company bankrupt within 48 hours. It was a setup, a bust-out scheme, the kind used by cartels to gut legitimate businesses, and the person waiting for him to sign wasn't an enemy. It was Robert Sterling, his lawyer, and Isabella, his fiancée, who was currently rubbing his arm and whispering, "Sign it before dessert comes, Harry. Let's get it done." Madeline froze. She should walk away. This wasn't her problem. She was a waitress. She needed this job. If she spoke up, she exposed herself. If she exposed herself, the people hunting her might find her. "Walk away, Maddie," she told herself. "Just walk away." She finished pouring the water. She stepped back. "Pen!" Harrison demanded, snapping his fingers without looking up. "Robert, give me the pen." Robert handed him a heavy gold fountain pen. His hand was shaking. Harrison didn't notice. He was too drunk on victory. He uncapped the pen. The nib hovered over the paper. Madeline looked at Harrison. He was arrogant, rude, and dismissive. But he was about to be framed for corporate embezzlement on a massive scale. He would go to prison for decades, while the people at this table vanished with his billions. She couldn't do it. She couldn't watch a crime happen, not when she knew exactly how it worked. Madeline stopped moving. She took a breath that felt like inhaling broken glass. She turned back to the table. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," she said. Her voice wasn't the soft, subservient whisper of a waitress. It was the cold, authoritative tone of a senior forensic auditor. The silence that followed was absolute. For 3 seconds, no one moved. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the obsidian room. The clinking of silverware from other tables seemed miles away. Harrison Blackwell froze, the gold pen millimeters from the paper. He slowly turned his head, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He looked at the empty space where a person should be, and then looked down to find Madeline. "Excuse me," Harrison said, his voice dangerously low. Arthur, the manager, was already sprinting across the dining room, his face pale with terror. But Madeline didn't look at Arthur. She locked eyes with Harrison. "I said, I wouldn't do that," Madeline repeated, her hands clasped behind her back. "Not unless you want to be indicted for federal fraud by Monday morning." Isabella let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Harrison, is this a joke? Is she an actress you hired?" "I didn't hire her," Harrison snapped. He turned his body fully toward Madeline, his eyes cold and hard. "Do you know who I am?" "I know you're Harrison Blackwell," Madeline said calmly. "And I know that document in front of you isn't a standard merger agreement. It's a leveraged debt transfer disguised as an acquisition. Specifically, look at Clause 14b and the definition of the acquiring entity." Robert Sterling, the lawyer, turned the color of ash. He slammed his hand down on the table, covering the papers. "This is outrageous. Arthur, get this woman out of here immediately." "No," Harrison said, raising a hand to stop the manager. He looked at Robert's sweating face, then back to Madeline. A slow, cruel smirk spread across his lips. The tension broke. Harrison laughed. It was a loud, booming bark of amusement that made heads turn across the restaurant. He leaned back in his leather booth, shaking his head. "A debt transfer," Harrison chuckled, looking at his dinner guests. "Did you hear that? The waitress is giving legal advice. This is rich. This is truly rich." He looked Madeline up and down, his eyes filled with mockery. "Let me guess, sweetie. You took a business law class at community college? Or did you read a blog post about corporate finance?" "Harrison, please." Isabella sighed, bored. "Just fire her and sign the papers. The champagne is getting warm." "You're right," Harrison said, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye. "You're about to lose everything," he mimicked, pitching his voice high to mock her. God, the drama. "Listen to me." He pointed the gold pen at Madeline's face. "I have a team of Harvard-educated lawyers. I have advisors who charge more per hour than you make in a year. And you think you, carrying a water pitcher, caught something they missed?" "They didn't miss it," Madeline said quietly. Harrison's smile faltered slightly. "What?" "They didn't miss it, Mr. Blackwell," Madeline said, her gaze shifting to Robert Sterling, whose hand was still pinning the papers to the table. "They wrote it." Robert stood up, knocking his chair over. "That is enough. You are fired. Get out. Security." "Sit down, Robert," Harrison commanded, though his voice had lost its humor. He stared at Madeline. "You're accusing my general counsel of fraud? Do you have any idea how insane you sound?" "I'm not guessing," Madeline said. She took a step closer to the table, ignoring the manager who was now tugging at her elbow. "Mr. Blackwell, look at the footer on page 4. It references a BS Holdings, LLC. Ask your lawyer who the signatory for that LLC is. If he says it's you, he's lying. It's a shelf company registered in the Caymans 3 days ago. The signatory is likely a nominee director. But the beneficiary? I'd bet my life the beneficiary is linked to the man sitting across from you." She nodded toward the silent, pale European man. The European man picked up his wine glass. His hand was perfectly steady. "She is clearly mentally unstable, Harrison. A pity. The service was adequate until now." Harrison looked at the European. Then he looked at Robert. Robert was sweating so profusely that drops were running down his temple. "Robert," Harrison asked, "what is BS Holdings, LLC?" It's just a holding vehicle for tax purposes, Harrison," Robert stammered, his voice cracking. "Standard procedure. This woman is a lunatic. She's probably looking for a payout, a lawsuit." Harrison looked back at Madeline. He saw the cheap polyester uniform, the tired shoes, the lack of jewelry. Then he looked at her eyes. They were clear, fierce, and utterly unafraid. He looked down at the paper. He moved Robert's hand away. "Page 4, Harrison muttered. He flipped the page. He scanned the bottom. BS Holdings, LLC, Cayman. Harrison paused. He looked at the definitions page Madeline had mentioned earlier. The laughter was gone now. The air in the booth grew heavy, suffocating. "Robert," Harrison said softly, reading the text. "Why does this say that the liability for the Helios debt is transferred to the primary parent company, while the assets remain with the holding LLC?" It's a drafting error," Robert lied, his eyes darting to the exit. "A typo. I'll have the associates fix it in the morning. Just sign it now to lock the price, and we'll amend it later." "No," Madeline cut in. "If you sign that, the error becomes binding law. Once the ink is dry, the debt triggers a default on your main loans. Your stock crashes. The holding company, which you don't own, buys your assets for pennies on the dollar." She looked straight at Harrison. "It's called a vulture trap. And you are the carcass." Harrison stared at the paper. The silence stretched out, agonizingly long. The reality of what was happening began to dawn on him. The sweat on his lawyer's face, the cold detachment of the European investor, the urgency of his fiancée. Harrison Blackwell looked up. He didn't laugh this time. He looked at the waitress with a mixture of horror and awe. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Just a waitress," Madeline said. "But if I were you, I'd ask your fiancée why she's been texting the European gentleman under the table for the last 20 minutes. Isabella gasped, clutching her phone. "I haven't. You lying little—" "Check her phone," Madeline challenged, her voice hard as steel. "Check the last message sent to a number ending in 44. Harrison turned slowly to Isabella. "Give me the phone." "Harrison, don't be ridiculous," Isabella said, forcing a laugh. "She's trying to divide us. It's a trick. Give me the phone." Harrison's voice was a roar that silenced the entire restaurant. Isabella froze. Robert Sterling looked like he was about to vomit. The European man quietly placed his napkin on the table and began to stand up. "Sit down," Madeline barked at the European, her command echoing with such authority that the man actually hesitated. Harrison snatched the phone from Isabella's hand. He looked at the screen. He tapped it once. His face went pale. All the color drained from his skin, leaving him looking like a ghost. He looked up at Isabella, betrayal warring with shock in his eyes. "It says—" Harrison's voice trembled. "He's signing. Get the jet ready." Harrison looked at the waitress. He looked at the pen in his hand, the weapon that had almost ended his life. He dropped the pen. It clattered against the fine china, the sound like a gunshot in the silent room. "You weren't lying," Harrison breathed. "No," Madeline said. "But now you have a bigger problem, because now they know that you know." She nodded toward the restaurant entrance. Two large men in dark suits who had been waiting by the valet stand were now moving briskly toward the table. They didn't look like customers. They looked like cleaners. "Mr. Blackwell," Madeline said, grabbing a steak knife from the table and slipping it into her apron pocket in one fluid motion. "If you want to live to keep your billions, I suggest you come with me. Now. Through the kitchen." Harrison looked at his security, then at the approaching men, then at the woman in the apron. "Lead the way," he said. Harrison Blackwell had spent his life in boardrooms, private jets, and penthouses. He was a master of the universe, a man who moved mountains with a signature. But as Madeline Courier shoved him through the swinging double doors into the kitchen of the Obsidian Room, he was nothing more than a stumbling obstacle in a world of stainless steel and shouting. "Behind! Sharp! Hot!" The kitchen was a chaotic ballet of white coats and steam. Chefs screamed orders, pans flared with fire, and the smell of truffle oil and seared beef was overwhelming. Harrison, in his $6,000 suit, collided with a sous chef carrying a tray of oysters. The tray clattered to the floor, ice and shells exploding everywhere. "Watch it, you idiot!" the chef roared. "Keep moving!" Madeline ordered, gripping Harrison's sleeve with a strength that shocked him. She navigated the chaos like a shark swimming through a reef, dodging line cooks and dishwashers with practiced ease. "My car!" Harrison gasped, looking back at the swinging doors. "The valet. My driver. Jenkins. If your fiancé sold you out, your driver is gone too," Madeline hissed without stopping. "The European, Viktor Kovich, doesn't leave loose ends. If you get in that limo, you'll have a heart attack before you hit the first stoplight." The double doors behind them burst open. The two men in suits entered. They didn't look like customers anymore. One of them, a towering figure with a shaved head, reached inside his jacket. He wasn't reaching for a wallet. "Go!" Madeline shoved Harrison toward the back exit. As Harrison stumbled toward the heavy metal door marked "Emergency Exit Only," Madeline stopped. She grabbed a sizzling pan of clarified butter off the nearest burner. "Hey, that's for table 6, a line cook yelled. Madeline didn't hesitate. As the first gunman lunged past the prep station, she swung the pan. The hot liquid arc splashed across the floor directly in his path. The gunman's expensive leather soles hit the grease, and his feet went out from under him. He crashed hard into a rack of metal mixing bowls, sending them thundering to the ground. The second gunman, smaller but faster, jumped over his fallen partner. He locked eyes with Madeline. He reached for a suppressed pistol. Madeline grabbed a heavy industrial fire extinguisher from the wall. She didn't try to hit him with it. He was too far away. Instead, she ripped the pin and squeezed the handle, aiming the nozzle not at the man, but at the ceiling ventilation intake above the grill. A massive cloud of white chemical dust exploded into the air, instantly sucked up by the powerful fans, and blasted back down into the kitchen, creating a blinding white fog. "Fire!" someone screamed. The kitchen erupted into panic. "Move!" Madeline shouted, grabbing Harrison by the collar of his jacket and hauling him through the back door. They spilled out into the cool night air of the alleyway. It smelled of garbage and stale beer. Rain had started to fall, slicking the cobblestones. "My phone!" Harrison patted his pockets frantically. "I left my phone at the table." "Good," Madeline said, scanning the alley. "It has a GPS tracker. They would have found us in 5 minutes." "But my accounts, my contacts..." Harrison looked like he was hyperventilating. He was a man stripped of his armor. "You're a ghost now, Mr. Blackwell," Madeline said, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the street. "Right now, your billions can't buy you a pack of gum, but I can keep you alive. Do you trust me?" Harrison looked at the waitress. Her bun had come loose, strands of brown hair plastering to her face in the rain. She looked fierce, dangerous, and completely in control. He thought of Isabella's treacherous smile. He thought of his lawyer's sweating face. "I don't have a choice," Harrison said. "Correct," Madeline replied. "Run!" They sprinted down the alley just as the back door banged open again. A silenced gunshot foot-fut chipped the brick wall inches from Harrison's ear. He yelped, ducking his head, and ran faster than he had ever run in his life. They burst onto Fifth Avenue. It was crowded with tourists and theater-goers. Madeline didn't stop. She weaved through the crowd, dragging the billionaire behind her. She didn't head for a taxi. She headed for the subway station entrance. "No," Harrison panted, seeing the grimy stairs leading underground. "I don't do subways." "You do tonight," Madeline said, shoving him through the turnstile as she swiped her own pass. "Unless you want to wait for Kovich's men to pull up to the curb." They tumbled down the stairs just as the rumble of an approaching train shook the platform. The train was a rattling metal tube of fluorescent light and tired humanity. Harrison Blackwell sat squeezed between a woman with 3 grocery bags and a teenager listening to music so loud it leaked from his headphones. Harrison stared at his reflection in the dark window opposite him. He looked wrecked. His tie was gone, his suit was wet, and his world had ended in the span of an appetizer course. Madeline stood by the doors, watching the reflection of the other passengers, her body tense, ready to spring. They rode in silence for 40 minutes, changing trains twice. Madeline made them switch cars at the last second, a counter-surveillance move that left Harrison dizzy. Finally, they exited at a stop in Queens, far from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with brick row houses and dim streetlights. Madeline led him to a small, nondescript apartment building. She didn't use a key for the front door. She jimmied the lock with a thin piece of metal she pulled from her shoe. "This is breaking and entering," Harrison whispered, scandalized. "It's my apartment," Madeline said dryly. I just lost my key last week and didn't want to pay the landlord $50 for a new one. They climbed 3 flights of stairs. The apartment was tiny, a studio with a single window, a kitchenette, and a futon. It was clean but sparse. There were no photos on the walls, no personal touches. It looked like a place where someone waited, not where someone lived. Madeline locked the door and engaged 3 separate deadbolts. She went to the window and pulled the blackout curtains tight. Only then did she seem to exhale. "Sit," she told Harrison, pointing to the futon. Harrison remained standing. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, hard anger. "Who are you?" he demanded. The authority was creeping back into his voice. "Waitresses don't know about Cayman Island shell companies. Waitresses don't know how to create chemical smoke screens in kitchens, and they certainly don't know how to evade professional hitmen." Madeline walked to the kitchenette and poured 2 glasses of tap water. She downed hers in one gulp. "My name is Madeline Courier," she said, turning to face him. "But 3 years ago, my name was Agent Sarah Vance. I worked for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, specifically a task force dedicated to dismantling high-level corporate bust-outs." Harrison stared at her. "You're a Fed?" "Was," she corrected. "I was investigating a syndicate operating out of Eastern Europe. They specialize in infiltrating billion-dollar companies. They plant people inside, lovers, lawyers, board members. They gain trust, and then they trigger a liquidity event that transfers the assets offshore, leaving the CEO with the debt and the prison sentence." Harrison sank onto the futon. "Isabella," he whispered. "I met her in Paris 2 years ago. It was like a fairy tale." "It was a script," Madeline said ruthlessly. "Isabella Vane isn't a philanthropist. She's a honey trap operative. She's done this before. In London, in Dubai, in Singapore. And Robert Sterling, he's been on their payroll for 5 years. He has a gambling debt in Macau that Kovich owns." Harrison put his head in his hands. "I was going to marry her. I was going to give her half the company." "And they got greedy," Madeline said. "They wanted it all. Tonight was the end game. If you had signed that paper, by tomorrow morning, Blackwell Sovereign would be hollowed out. You'd be facing 20 years for embezzlement, and they would be on a beach in a non-extradition country." "Why you?" Harrison looked up, his eyes red. "Why were you at that restaurant?" "Because I'm hunting them," Madeline said softly. A shadow passed over her face, a look of profound grief. 3 years ago, I got close to Kovich. Too close. My partner, he was my fiancé. His name was David. We were going to bring them down." She paused, her hand tightening around the empty glass. "They found out. They rigged David's car. I was supposed to be in it, but I was running late." She looked at Harrison. "I watched him burn, Mr. Blackwell. The agency couldn't protect me. Kovich has people everywhere. So I ran. I died, on paper. I became Madeline the waitress. I've been tracking Kovich's movements for 30 months, waiting for him to surface in New York." "You saved me," Harrison said, realizing the gravity of it. "You blew your cover to save me." "I blew my cover because you were the first target who actually spotted the trap, even if you needed a push," Madeline said. "And because I need you." "Need me?" Harrison laughed bitterly. "I have nothing. You said it yourself. I can't access my accounts. My friends are likely compromised. I'm a dead man walking." "You have something they don't have," Madeline said. She walked over to a small, battered laptop sitting on a crate. She opened it. "You have the biometrics." "The what?" "To move the money from the Cayman account back to a secure location, or to freeze the transfer, requires a retinal scan and a voice print from the CEO of the parent company. That's you." Madeline typed furiously. "Kovich thinks you're dead or running. He doesn't think you're fighting back. He's going to try to forge your authorization, but that takes time. Maybe 12 hours. She turned the laptop around. It showed a map of the city with several red, blinking lights. "We have until dawn," Madeline said. "We need to break into your own corporate headquarters, get to the secure server room on the 50th floor, and lock them out of the system before they drain your life's work. And then we need to send the evidence to the one person at the FBI I still trust." Harrison stood up. The shock was replaced by a cold determination. He smoothed his ruined suit jacket. He looked at the woman who had served him water an hour ago. "My building has state-of-the-art security," Harrison said. "Guards, cameras, motion sensors." "I know," Madeline smiled, a small, dangerous curve of her lips. "I studied the blueprints while I was folding napkins, but we're not going in the front door." Harrison looked at her. "How do we get in?" "Do you remember the window-washing rigs you hired last month to clean the glass facade?" Madeline asked. Harrison paled. "You're joking." "I never joke about heights," Madeline said, pulling a black duffel bag from under the bed. She tossed him a pair of black tactical pants and a hoodie. "Put these on, billionaire. Tonight you're not the CEO. You're the crew." The Blackwell Sovereign Tower rose 60 stories into the Manhattan night, a monolith of black glass and steel that seemed to drink the light from the street lamps below. To the average New Yorker, it was a symbol of unshakable power. To Harrison Blackwell, standing in the service alleyway, shivering in a borrowed hoodie, it looked like a tombstone. "The service elevator code changes weekly," Madeline said, her voice barely audible over the wind and rain. She was punching numbers into a keypad by a heavy steel loading dock door. "But the cleaning crew uses a master override, 19840. The light turned green. The lock clicked. "How do you know that?" Harrison asked, his teeth chattering. He felt stripped naked without his bespoke suit, reduced to a common burglar in his own kingdom. "I spent 6 months dating the head of your janitorial staff's nephew," Madeline lied smoothly, though her eyes were scanning the hallway for cameras. "Information is currency, Harrison. You just never bothered to pick up the pennies." They slipped inside. The service corridor smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a smell Harrison had never encountered in his life of private elevators and penthouse suites. Madeline moved with the silent, predatory grace of a jungle cat, taking out a can of spray paint she had swiped from the alley. As they passed security cameras, she didn't dodge them. She sprayed the lenses with black paint before the autofocus could lock onto their faces. "Roof access," she whispered, pointing to a caged ladder at the end of a maintenance shaft. "We can't use the elevators. Kovich will have hacked the internal grid by now. If the elevator moves, an alarm goes off." "We're walking up 60 floors." Harrison looked at her in horror. "No," Madeline said, checking the tension on the harness she had stolen from the maintenance locker. "We're going up to the 15th floor setbacks, then taking the external window washer rig to the 50th. Harrison felt his stomach drop. "It's a storm, Madeline. The wind sheer alone. We'll mask our heat signature from the thermal sensors," she finished. "Move." The climb to the 15th floor was grueling. By the time they kicked open the door to the setback roof, Harrison's lungs were burning. The wind hit them like a physical blow, a wet, freezing hammer that threatened to knock them off the ledge. The city was a grid of blurred lights far below. The window-washing rig, a metal cradle suspended by thick steel cables, swayed violently in the gale. It looked like a death trap. "Get in!" Madeline ordered, shouting to be heard over the roar of the wind. "This is insanity," Harrison yelled back, gripping the railing. "I'm worth $40 billion. I don't die in a bucket." Madeline grabbed his jacket and yanked him close. Her face was inches from his, wet with rain, her grey eyes burning with intensity. "You aren't worth a dime right now, Harrison. You're a liability, but you're the only key I have to stop a war criminal. Now get in the basket, or I'll throw you off the roof myself." Harrison stared at her. He saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't asking. He climbed into the swaying metal cage. Madeline jumped in beside him. She bypassed the safety controls and hot-wired the motorbox with her pocket knife. The gears ground together with a shriek of protesting metal. The rig lurched upward. The ascent was a nightmare. The wind battered the cage, slamming it against the side of the building with deafening clangs. Harrison huddled on the metal floor, eyes squeezed shut, clutching the grating until his knuckles turned white. Every gust of wind swung them out over the abyss of the New York skyline. "Don't look down," Madeline said calmly, her hand steady on the controls. "Look at me. Tell me about the server room." "What?" Harrison gasped. "Focus, Harrison. The server room. The 50th floor. What's the layout?" Harrison forced himself to breathe. He visualized the blueprints he had approved years ago. It's behind the executive suite. Biometric lock. Inside, there's a central terminal. The black box. It controls the global routing for all Blackwell assets. Does it have an air gap? Yes, it's not connected to the internet unless manually bridged by 2 keys. Mine and the CFO's. "Robert Sterling," Madeline spat the name out. "He'll have his key. They just need your eye." The rig jolted to a halt. They were hovering outside the 50th floor. Through the rain-slicked glass, the executive offices looked dark and serene. Madeline pulled a suction cup glass cutter from her bag, another tool from her past life. She attached it to the pane. "We have 3 minutes before the pressure sensors detect the breach," she said. She scored a perfect circle in the glass, tapped it, and pulled the disc free. The wind howled through the hull. She reached in and unlocked the latch. They tumbled into the office, landing on the plush Persian carpet. The silence of the room was jarring after the roar of the storm outside. Harrison stood up, shaking. He looked around his office, his mahogany desk, his award shelf, the picture of him and Isabella on his credenza. It all looked like a set from a movie he was no longer starring in. "The server room is through there." Harrison pointed to a discreet panel in the wall, disguised as a bookshelf. Madeline drew a gun. Harrison blinked. He hadn't seen where she'd been hiding it. It was a compact, matte black pistol. "Stay behind me," she whispered. They approached the hidden door. Harrison placed his hand on the biometric scanner. A beam of red light scanned his palm. Then he leaned in for the retinal scan. "Identity confirmed. Harrison Blackwell. Welcome back, sir." The hidden door hissed open. Cool blue light spilled out from the server room. The hum of cooling fans filled the air. Rows of black server towers blinked with rhythmic precision. In the center of the room sat the master terminal. "We made it," Harrison breathed, rushing toward the keyboard. "I can lock the accounts. I can freeze the transfer." "Wait," Madeline said sharply. She stopped moving. She was looking at the floor. "What? We have to hurry." "Harrison, stop!" Madeline warned, raising her gun. "The dust." Harrison looked down. On the pristine white floor of the server room, there were faint, wet footprints leading toward the back of the servers. "We aren't the first ones here," Madeline whispered. Before Harrison could react, a slow clap echoed from the shadows behind the server racks. "Bravo," a smooth, accented voice purred. "I must say, I didn't think the Waitress had it in her. The window washer rig? Inspired. Truly inspired." Viktor Kovich stepped out from behind the black towers. He was holding a suppressed pistol, leveled casually at Harrison's chest. And sitting in the chair in front of the master terminal, spinning around slowly to face them, was Isabella. She held a glass of Harrison's best scotch in one hand and Harrison's secondary security key in the other. "Hello, darling," Isabella smiled. It was a cold, reptilian smile. "You're soaking wet. You really should have just signed the papers at dinner. It would have been so much less messy." The server room, usually a sanctuary of cold logic and data, was now a cage. Harrison stared at Isabella, his heart hammering against his ribs. The betrayal wasn't just a sting. It was a physical nausea. She looked perfectly at home in his chair, wearing the red dress from dinner, dry and comfortable while he shivered in damp tactical gear. "Isabella," Harrison choked out. "Why?" "Oh, Harrison, don't be tedious," Isabella sighed, taking a sip of the scotch. "Because I like money. And Victor promised me $100 million and a villa in Montenegro. You were fun for a while. But you're so exhausting, always talking about legacy and integrity. It's boring." "Drop the gun, Madeline," Kovich said softly, shifting his aim from Harrison to Madeline's head. "I know who you are. Agent Force 19, the one who got away." Madeline didn't flinch. Her gun remained trained on Kovich's heart. "And you're Victor Kovich, the butcher of Belgrade. I've been waiting 3 years to put a bullet in you." "And yet here we are," Kovich smiled, revealing capped teeth. "If you shoot me, I shoot the billionaire. And then Isabella presses enter, and the money is gone anyway. You lose." "He can't authorize the transfer," Madeline said, her voice steady. "You need his retina." "We have him," Kovich gestured with the gun barrel. "Harrison, be a good boy and come here. Let Isabella scan your eye. If you do, I might let you live. I'll leave you enough to retire in, let's say, Ohio." "Don't do it, Harrison," Madeline warned. "He's lying. Once the transfer is complete, we're both dead." Harrison looked at the gun. He looked at Isabella. Then he looked at Madeline. For the first time in his life, Harrison Blackwell stopped calculating odds and started calculating character. He looked at the woman who had dragged him through a kitchen, an alley, a subway, and a storm. A woman who had nothing to gain but justice. Harrison straightened his spine. He took a step forward, but not toward Kovich. He stepped in front of Madeline, shielding her body with his own. "No," Harrison said. The room went silent. Kovich blinked, surprised. "Excuse me?" Kovich asked. "I said no." Harrison's voice gained strength. He looked at Isabella with disgust. "You want my money? You want my company? You can't have it. And you certainly can't have my dignity." "I will shoot you in the kneecap," Kovich threatened, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Go ahead," Harrison challenged. "If I'm in shock, my pupils dilate. The scanner won't work. You need me calm, awake, and cooperative. And I am none of those things." Isabella slammed her glass down. "Victor, stop playing with him. Just cut his eye out and use it." "That is technologically possible," Kovich mused, his eyes narrowing. "But messy." "Madeline," Harrison whispered without turning his head. "Do you trust me?" "What are you doing?" she hissed. "I'm improvising." Harrison suddenly lunged, not at Kovich, but at the fire suppression panel on the wall to his right. "Stop him!" Isabella screamed. Kovich fired. The bullet grazed Harrison's shoulder, tearing through the hoodie and flesh, spinning him around. Harrison screamed in pain, but slammed his bloody hand onto the big red button marked Halen Discharge. Whoosh! A klaxon began to wail. Warning, oxygen displacement, imminent, evacuate. Massive vents in the ceiling opened, dumping halon gas into the room. Halon was designed to extinguish electrical fires by chemically disrupting combustion and displacing oxygen. It wasn't toxic instantly, but it made breathing difficult and visibility blurry within seconds. "You idiot!" Kovich roared, coughing as the gas hit him. "Now!" Harrison yelled, dropping to the floor where the oxygen was slightly richer. Madeline didn't need to be told twice. As Kovic flinched from the gas and the sudden alarm, she fired. Bang! Bang! She didn't shoot to kill. The gas made aiming precise shots at Kovic's head, too risky with Harrison in the way. She shot the cooling pipes running directly above Kovic. High-pressure coolant, liquid nitrogen and antifreeze, exploded downward in a freezing white geyser. Kovic screamed as the supercooled liquid hit his arm and face, blinding him instantly. He dropped his gun, clutching his face, stumbling backward into the server racks. "My eyes! I can't see!" Kovic shrieked. Isabella was scrambling under the desk, terrified. "Harrison, the terminal!" Madeline shouted, coughing in the thinning air. Harrison, clutching his bleeding shoulder, crawled toward the master terminal. The pain was blinding, but the adrenaline pushed him forward. He pulled himself up to the chair, shoving Isabella aside. She kicked at him with her high heels, sobbing. "Get off! It's mine!" she shrieked. "It was never yours," Harrison gritted out. He grabbed a heavy metal keyboard and swung it blindly, connecting with Isabella's shin. She howled and scurried back. Harrison grabbed the mouse. His vision was swimming. The screen was blurring. Transfer status, 99% authorized, awaiting biometric confirmation. He leaned forward. The red laser scanned his eye. Identity confirmed. He moved the cursor to the cancel button, but then he stopped. Madeline was beside him now, covering the door, watching Kovic writhe on the floor. "Harrison, cancel it!" "No," Harrison panted, a wild idea forming in his mind. "If I cancel it, the money stays in the accounts. They can try again. They have the codes. Robert Sterling has the keys." "So what are you doing?" "I'm changing the destination," Harrison said, his fingers flying across the keys. He deleted the routing number for BS Holdings LLC, Cayman. "Where are you sending $40 billion? Madeline asked, her eyes wide. Harrison typed in a routing number he had memorized from a charity gala 3 years ago, a number for the Global Relief Fund for victims of financial crime. It was a one-way donation portal. "I'm giving it away," Harrison said. "All of it." "Harrison, that's your entire life." "No." Harrison looked at Madeline, his face pale but smiling. "This company was my life, but it almost got me killed. I'm buying my freedom." He hit enter. Transaction complete. Funds transferred. Account balance $0.00. The screen flashed green. "It's gone," Harrison whispered, slumping back in the chair. "I'm broke." "You crazy son of a bitch," Madeline breathed, a look of pure respect on her face. Suddenly, the door to the server room blew inward with a deafening crash. Through the halon mist, 6 heavily armed men in SWAT gear stormed in. But they weren't Kovic's men. They wore jackets emblazoned with 3 yellow letters, FBI. "Federal agents, drop your weapons. Get on the ground." A woman in a trench coat stepped through the smoke. It was Special Agent Miller, Madeline's old contact. Madeline lowered her gun and raised her hands, a tired smile on her face. She looked at Harrison. "I guess the email I sent from the subway finally went through," she said. Harrison looked at the FBI agents, then at Kovic, whimpering on the floor, and finally at Isabella, who was staring at the screen that read 0.00 in absolute horror. Harrison Blackwell, the former billionaire, closed his eyes and started to laugh. The chaos of the server room subsided into the clinical, organized procedure of a federal crime scene. The halon gas had dissipated, leaving the air smelling of ozone and burnt electronics. Harrison sat on the edge of the desk, a paramedic wrapping his bleeding shoulder in thick gauze. He watched as 2 agents hauled Viktor Kovic to his feet. The European's face was red and blistering from the coolant burns, his eyes swollen shut. He wasn't the terrifying Butcher of Belgrade anymore. He was just a broken man in handcuffs, whimpering as they read him his rights. But the truly pathetic sight was Isabella. She wasn't being dragged away, She was refusing to move. She stood staring at the monitor, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into the plastic casing of the screen. "It's a glitch," she muttered, her eyes wide and manic. "It has to be a glitch. $40 billion doesn't just vanish. It can't go to charity." Special Agent Miller stepped forward, snapping a pair of steel cuffs onto Isabella's wrists. "It didn't vanish, Ms. Vane. It went to the victims of people like you. And considering the testimony we just secured from your partner, Robert Sterling, in the lobby, you're going to have a long time to think about the irony of that." Isabella turned to Harrison as they led her away. Her mask of elegance had completely shattered. "You fool!" she screamed, spitting the words at him. "You ruined everything. You're nothing now. You're dirt. You'll be eating at soup kitchens." Harrison met her gaze. He didn't look angry. He looked tired, but for the first time in years, completely unburdened. "Maybe," Harrison said softly, "but I'll be eating with my own spoon." As the elevator doors closed on his screaming ex-fiancée, Harrison turned to find Madeline. She was standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. She had wiped the soot from her face, but the exhaustion was etched deep into her features. She looked small against the backdrop of the skyline, yet she was the strongest person he had ever met. "You should get that shoulder checked at a hospital," Madeline said without turning around. "I'm fine," Harrison said, sliding off the desk. He walked over to stand beside her. "So, Agent Miller said you're reinstated. You got your life back." "I got my badge back," Madeline corrected. "My life, that's a different story. The name Madeline Courier is burned. Kovich's network is dismantled, but I can't go back to being a waitress. And I can't be the person I was before David died." She turned to look at him. "What about you? You realize what you did, right? The board of directors is going to sue you. The shareholders will riot. You just bankrupt one of the biggest conglomerates in America to stop a theft." "I saved them from a bust out," Harrison shrugged, wincing slightly. "The company would have collapsed anyway. This way the assets do some good before the lawyers pick the carcass clean. I'll likely be barred from running a public company ever again." "You lost $40 billion tonight, Harrison." Harrison looked at his reflection in the glass, the torn hoodie, the bandage, the messy hair. He smiled. "I lost a target on my back," he said, "and I found something worth a lot more." He looked at her. The air between them was charged, not with the superficial chemistry he had with Isabella, but with the forged-in fire bond of survival. "I don't even know your real name," Harrison realized. "Not really." "It's Sarah," she whispered. "But I think I like Madeline better. Madeline didn't take orders from anyone." "Agent Miller is waiting for you," Harrison said, nodding toward the door where the FBI team was packing up. "I guess this is it." Madeline hesitated. She reached out and briefly touched his good hand. Her fingers were warm. "Goodbye, Harrison. Try to stay out of the kitchen." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the sea of law enforcement uniforms. Harrison stood alone in his ruined office, penniless, injured, and smiling. The bell above the door of the Rook and Pawn chimed softly. It was a small, cozy cafe in Brooklyn, the kind of place that smelled of roasted coffee beans and old books. It wasn't exclusive. It wasn't high-end. It was real. Harrison Blackwell walked in. He wasn't wearing a $6,000 suit. He was wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and a comfortable leather jacket. He carried a laptop bag over one shoulder. He wasn't a billionaire anymore. The fallout had been spectacular. The lawsuits, the media frenzy, the bankruptcy hearings. It had dominated the news for months. Harrison had sold his penthouses, his cars, and his art collection to pay off the legal fees, and settle with the minor shareholders. He walked away with $0 in his bank account, but a clean conscience. He walked to the counter. The cafe was busy, filled with students and locals. He waited his turn. "What can I get you?" asked a young barista with green hair. "Black coffee, please, and a table for two." "Take a seat anywhere. We'll bring it out." Harrison moved to the back of the room. There, sitting at a corner table with a chessboard set up in front of her, was a woman reading a paperback novel. She wore a simple beige sweater and jeans. Her hair was down, loose and wavy, no longer pulled back in a severe bun. She looked softer, younger. Harrison pulled out the chair opposite her. "Is this seat taken?" The woman lowered her book. Grey eyes, sharp and intelligent, looked up at him. A slow smile spread across her face. "Depends," Madeline said. "Are you a paying customer, or are you looking for a place to hide from hitmen?" "I'm done hiding," Harrison said, sitting down. "I saw the news," Madeline said, closing her book. "You opened a cybersecurity consultancy. White Knight Security. Small office, 3 employees. It pays the rent," Harrison said. "We help small businesses protect themselves against predatory takeovers and fraud. It's honest work. I don't miss the boardrooms." "And the billions?" she teased. "I miss the private jet a little," he admitted with a laugh. "But the subway isn't so bad. You meet interesting people." The barista arrived with 2 coffees. Harrison paid with cash, a few crumpled bills from his pocket. "So," Harrison said, nodding at the chessboard, "I hear you know how to play." "I know how to win," Madeline corrected. "White moves first." Harrison reached out and moved a pawn. "I wanted to thank you, Sarah, Madeline, for everything." "You saved yourself in the end, Harrison," she said, moving her knight. "I just opened the door." "I was thinking," Harrison said, leaning forward. "My firm, we're growing. I need a partner. Someone who knows forensic accounting. Someone who can spot a trap before the ink is dry. Someone who isn't afraid to throw a fire extinguisher at a problem." Madeline paused, her hand hovering over a bishop. She looked at Harrison. She saw the man who had given up everything to do the right thing. She saw the partner she had been missing since her life fell apart 3 years ago. "The pay won't be great," Harrison warned, "and the coffee is terrible." Madeline smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Harrison had ever seen. She moved her piece, capturing his pawn. "I'm used to terrible coffee," she said. "When do I start?" Harrison smiled back. He wasn't the master of the universe anymore. He was just a man in a coffee shop in Brooklyn. But as he looked at the woman across the chessboard, he knew one thing for certain. He was the richest man in the world. Wow! Harrison Blackwell went from having $40 billion to having nothing but a coffee shop date. And honestly, I think he got the better end of the deal. It's crazy to think that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. What about you? If you were in Harrison's shoes, holding that button in the server room, could you do it? Could you give away a fortune just to make sure the bad guys didn't win? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about karma, hidden identities, and sweet revenge, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.